Today is the 30th of July, and this is the Black Man's Read Aloud Hour. Continuing my journey through the Federal Writers Project, I am reading Recollections from the Mississippi Slave Narratives. Today I am visiting with Isaac Stier, ex-slave Lauderdale County, interviewed by Edith Wyatt Moore. Isaac Styer at this time, was living in Natchez, Mississippi. Miss, my name is Isaac Styer, but folks calls me Ike. I was named by my pappy, young master, and I ain't never told nobody all of that name. It's got 22 letters in it. It's wrote out in the family Bible. That's how I knows I'll be 100 years old if I live till the turn of the year. I was born in Jefferson County between Hamburg and Union Church. The plantation joined the Whitney place and the Montgomery place too. I belong to Mars James Styer. I don't rightly remember how many acres my master owned, but 'twas a big plantation with 80 or 90 hand of grown folk working it. No telling how many little black folks there was. My mammy was Ellen Styer and my pappy was Jordan Styer. He was brought to this country by a slave dealer from Nashville, Tennessee. They traveled all day way through Indian country on a foot. They come on their trace road. 'Twas nothing but an Indian trail. When they got to Natchez, the slaves were put in the pen attached to the slave markets. It stood at the forks of old St. Catherine Street and the Liberty Road. Here they was fed and washed and rubbed down like racehorses. Then they was dressed up and put through the paces that would show off their muscles. My papa was sold as a 12-year-old, but he always said he was near 20. The first man what brought him was a preacher, but he only kept him a little while. Then he was sold to Mr. Preacher Robinson. He was a Methodist. The slaves was well treated when they got sick. My master had a standing doctor, what he paid by the year. There was a hospital building near the quarters and a good old granny woman to nurse the sick. There was 5 or 6 beds in a room. One room was for men's and one was for women's. Us doctor was named Richardson, and he tended us long after the war. He sure was a gentleman and a powerful, a good doctor. Us had an overseer on the place, but he warn't mean like I hear other folks having. He was Mr. William Robinson. He was good to everybody, both white and colored. Folks didn't mind working for him 'cause he spoke kind, but the dassing him, he was poor. My papa belonged to his pa, Mr. John Robinson. That was a nice family with show enough religion. Whilst they weren't rich, they had learning. As a little tyke, I wore long slip-like shirts. When they sent me to town, I put on breeches and stuffed the tail of my slip in so it'd pass for a shirt. I always lived in the big house and played with the white children. I sort of looked after them. I carried them to school. Then while they was in school, I roamed the woods a hunting. Sometimes I get a big old bag of game, mostly used to feed the slaves. My mistress was Miss Sarah Stowers, and she teach me how to read. She teach me how to be manly too. On church days, I drive the carriage. I was proud to take my folks to meet, and I always sat in the back or pew and heard the preaching the same as they did. The best times I can remember always come round the 4th of July. There was always the beginning of camp meeting. Ain't nothing like that in these days. Everybody what had any standing went. They cooked up a whole trunks full of good things to eat and drive over to the campgrounds. The preacher had a big pavilion covered with sweet gum branches and carpeted with sawwood. Folks had wagons with hay and quilts. What the men folks slept. The ladies slept in little log houses, and they took their feather beds with them. Always driven the carriage for my white folks. Whilst they was a worshiping, I'd slip round and tossed out out the basket. Every day I'd eat till I was ready to bust. One day I got so sick I thought I'd pop wide open. I crawled down to the spring and washed my face in cold water, but I kept getting worse and worse. Then somebody called out, "Captain Styer, your niggas are dying." My master called the doctor. He sure was shamed in public because he knowed positively that I had been pilfering in them baskets. Them sure was good old days. I'd love to live them all over again. Us slaves mostly sung hymns and Sims. But I remember one song about a frog pond and one about Jump, Mr. Toad. I was too wordless to sing it now, but that was funny. Us danced plenty too. Some of the men clogged and pigeoned. But when us had dances, there was real cotillions like the white folks had. There was always a fiddling on Christmas and other holidays. The slaves was loud to invite their sweethearts from other plantations. I used to call out the figures, ladies, I say, gents to the left, now it all swing. Everybody liked my calls, and the dancers so moved smoothly and pretty. Long after the war was over, the white folks would gauge me to come round with the band and call out figures at all the big dances. They always paid me well. Oh, Mister, let us cook a grand supper and Mars slip us some liquor. Them suppers was the best I ever eat. Sometimes they will be wild turkey, fried fish, hot corn pone, fresh pork, ham, baked yams, chitlins, popcorn, apple pie, pound cake, raisins, and coffee. Lord, miss, the folks nowadays don't know nothing about good eating, no how. When the big war broke out, I sure stuck by my master. I fit the Yankees same as he did. I went to the battles alongside of him and both fit under Marsh Robert E. Lee. I reckon everybody had heard about him. I see more folks die anybody could count. Heaps of them all tore to pieces and crying to God to let them die. I told the water to them in blue the same as them in gray. Folks wouldn't believe the truth if I was to tell all I knows about them ungodly times. For the war, I never know what it was to go empty. My master sure set a fine table and fed his people the highest. The hungriest I'd ever been was at the siege of Vicksburg. That was a time I'd like to forget. The folks ate up all the cats and dogs and then went to devouring the mules and horses. Even the women and little children was starving. Their stomachs were sticking to their backbones. Us niggers was suffering, so us took to sweating hose blankets and soaked them in mud holes where the horses tropped. Then us wrung them out in buckets and drunk that dirty water for pot liquor. It tastes kind of salty and was a strengthening like a weak soup. I tell you, them Yankees took us by starvation. 'Twa'n't one a fair fight. They called it a victory and bagged about Vicksburg or falling, but hungry folks ain't got no fight left in them. Us folks were starved into surrender. The slaves expected a heap from Freedom Day they didn't get. They was led to believe that it would have an easy time, go places without passes, and have plenty of spending money. But they sure got fooled. Most of them didn't finish. Finish. There's no better off. Personally, I had a harder time after the war than I did in during slavery. Them Yankees passed us friends. They made big promises, but they was poor reliance. Some of them meant well towards us, but they was about a heap of things. They promised us a mule and 40 acres of land. Us ain't seen no mule yet. Us got the land all right, but 'twant no service. Fact is, 'twas way over in a territory where nothing would grow. I didn't know nothing about farming no hows. I've always been a coachman and play companion to the white children. The war was over in May of 1865, but I was captured in Vicksburg and held in jail till I agreed to take up arms with the North. I figured that was about all I could do, 'cause they weren't but one war at Vicksburg, and that was over. I was all the time hoping I could slip off and work my way back home, but the Yankees didn't turn me loose till 1866. Then I worked in a saloon in St. Louis. That was about all I know to do. All the time I was craving to come back to Mississippi. It sure suits my taste better anywhere as I've ever been. When I landed back home, my white folks welcomed me. After a while, I married a girl who was real smart about farming and chicken raising. So we sharecropped and raised a family. Somehow us always scraped along. Sometimes it was by the hardest, but us always had plenty to eat. All the colored folks would live to get back home, took to the land again. If the master was dead, they went to his friends and offered to sharecrop. They was all plumb sick of war. It sure is ungodly business. I never will forget the fearsome sight of seeing the men die for their time. War sure is the devil's own work. The Ku Klux Klan didn't bother me none. Of course, I was scared of them at first, but as soon as I learned that long as I behaved myself and tended my business, they weren't after me. They sure disastered them what matter with the white folks. Nobody but a smart aleck would have done that. Only niggers hunting trouble mixed in the white folks' business. Once at Twix, I seen the Ku Klux Klan riding by, but they always traveled fast, and I kept my mouth shut. After the war, my master come back home. The fences were gone, the cattle was gone, the money and the niggers was gone too. On top of that, the whole country was overrun and plumb took over by white trash. It was cautious times. After a while, robbers and low-down trash got to wearing robes and pretending they was Ku Kluxes. Folks called them white caps. They was vicious, and us was more scared of them than us ever been of the old Klan. When they got liquored up and the devil show was turned loose. Mr. Jefferson Davis was pretty good about some things, but if he hadn't been a mullish, he would have accepted his proposition Mr. Abe Lincoln made him. The slavery would have lasted always, but he flew into a huff and showed that he'd whipped them Yankees with corn stalks. That made Mr. Lincoln mad, so he sought about to free the slaves. Mr. Lincoln was a good man, but they tells me he was poor and never cut much figure in his clothes. That's why he never did understand how us felt about us white folks. It takes the quality to understand such things. Right now, I loves my master and his wife in the grave. They raised me and showed me kindness all their lives. I'm proud of them. At present time, I was under the treatment of old young Mr. Styer, was my master's grandson. I trust him and he showed good to me. I rents a place on Providence Plantation about 3 miles south of Natchez. The trip to Natchez in a rickety old wagon is most too much in the hot weather. My heart's most worn out. I can't last long 'cause I have a heap of exposure. I was just a bag of bones now, but once I stood nearly 6 foot in my stockings and weighed about 180 pounds. I was well muscled then, too. Now I was getting gray and getting bald at the same time. Black folks like me don't hardly ever get bald. I'm getting real feeble. This doctor says I got a bad heart. Sometimes I just has to sit on the curb and rest myself a spell. I kinds of get windless when I think about all I've been through. My wife's been dead about 17 years, and my children are so scattered that I don't know where they is. The folks I stayed with is powerful good to me and sees after me same as they was my own. I reckon I don't need nothing else. This generation ain't got much sense. They's trying to get somewheres too fast. None of them is satisfied with plain living. They wants too much. Nobody, nobody, nobody needs more than they can use, no how. And that is the end of the reading for today. We're going to be picking up. We're going to be picking up the reading tomorrow, but today we're finishing the story of Isaac Styer from Natchez, Mississippi. His recollections of being enslaved. You be a slave so long that sometimes if you don't know nothing else, you get accustomed to being a slave. And of course, Isaac, being damn near 100 years old, he probably didn't trust the woman that was trying to get him to recollect being a slave, probably because he maybe had some inner fears that this was all a big game. Rest in peace, Mrs. Styer, and God bless you.